One of the core concepts when we are discussing inflation is cost of living. So what exactly is the cost of living? The cost of living is the amount of money, the dollars it takes to buy the goods and services to achieve a given standard of living. This will be the cost of certain key categories like food, housing, energy, healthcare, taxes. This is what everyone's going to be utilizing to survive in this economy. The cost of living will, at a certain period of time, will be the starting point to determine what inflation is doing to those costs. Inflation is when the cost of living rises. It is measured by the percent change in that cost of living, and it's tracked on an annual basis. So when you hear in the news that inflation has gone up, that means the cost of living in that economy has gone up by 1%. So if you see 2% inflation, that means the cost of living has increased by 2%. So who exactly tracks inflation? Well, it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They calculate CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. The CPI measures the average price paid by consumers for a fixed basket of consumer goods and services. And that contains about 80,000 goods and services. They also track those in 30 metropolitan areas. Another way that inflation is tracked is the GDP deflator. Now, I'm not going to cover that. I'm not going to use that in this video, but I did want to make reference that if you ever hear the GDP deflator, it is very similar to CPI, but they do include military and government spending within that calculation. So I'm not going to use that as an example throughout this video. Now, obviously, the cost of living increasing does matter to individual people, but what government agencies use this and track this and take this data and use it to make policy decisions? Well, that is going to be the Federal Reserve, the Fed. They pay close attention to the rate of inflation because they'll use their monetary policies to influence inflation one way or the other. Basically, if the Federal Reserve feels like inflation is getting hot, they will use their monetary policies to slow down the economy. On the flip side, if they think inflation is low and they want to stir growth, they will change their monetary policies to influence job growth, which ultimately could lead to increased inflation. There is a fine line and a delicate balance that the Federal Reserve is playing when they're making their monetary policies. We will go into more detail in the Federal Reserve on what causes inflation. So let's hold on the Federal Reserve right now. If you've gotten any value out of this video so far, please smash that like button and please consider subscribing. All right, let's continue talking about inflation. That brings us to the question, is inflation bad? Well, that's a mixed answer. Stable, low, predictable inflation is not a bad thing at all. The Federal Reserve sets their target inflation per year at 2%. So if you have 1 to 3% inflation, that is not the end of the world. That's actually fairly stable inflation. And you expect prices, at least in the United States, we expect prices to slowly rise over a period of time. Now, high, fast-paced, unexpected inflation, that is not a good situation. And the opposite isn't a good situation either, which is this concept of deflation. So let's go through a couple examples of inflation environments that are very undesirable. Going into the 1970s, this was a term that was causing a lot of headaches within the economy of the United States. This is stagflation. Stagflation is a very undesirable situation to be in. This is when you have high inflation, you have high unemployment, and you have declining growth. You have all your economic key indicators moving in the wrong direction. This is not an easy problem to solve, and it's a very painful problem to solve if you end up in an economy with stagflation. So what's even worse than stagflation? Well, that's hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is when you're experiencing an economy that has an inflation rate of 50% per month. That is not good. That's an annual rate of 12,975%. You basically have no idea what your money is worth. Trying to buy things is impossible. Hyperinflation is a horrible situation to be in for any economy. Our next undesirable scenario is deflation. This is the opposite, the counter of inflation. This is when your money, your purchasing power is actually increasing. The value of the dollar increases. Now that sounds good on the surface level, but this deflation could really halter an economy. When you have a negative rate of inflation, prices are falling. So consumers are going to delay making purchases, assuming those prices are going to be lower in the future because of deflation.